Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the One Future Collective Festival. Today's panel is about kindness and revolution and the importance of nurturing and harnessing this kindness in everything that we do. I have with me some stellar people. Most panels are introduced by saying that we have an incredible lineup. And I'm going to be a moderator today, but to just start off, I'm going to say that none of the people that I have with me today need to be moderated. They basically need to be unleashed and left by themselves to be able to do whatever they're doing and making the impact that they are. I'm going to quickly introduce you to who we have today. We have with us Sonal Kapoor, who is the founder and director of Protsahan India Foundation. We have Naghma Mulla, the CEO of EdelGive Foundation. Mitali Bhasin, who is a social justice organizer. And we have Devyani Kacker, who is in charge of access to justice and is an access to justice specialist at the Azim Premji Philanthropic Initiative. So we're going to begin right away and dive into the theme, which is that of kindness. And I'm going to ask each one of you to make your opening comments on the basis of why you do what you do and why you think kindness or compassion or making an impact in a positive manner is at the core of what you're doing. And I'm going to call out your names and we'll go from there. So if Sonal, you'd like to begin by answering that question and sharing with us a little bit about how kindness is at the core of your work and why you're doing what you're doing.
First up, thank you for having me. It's really beautiful to Naghma and I've been friends on Facebook, but just here to like be on the same panel and have conversations. I think it's really sweet. Thank you for creating that space. I think with respect to our work at Protsahan, a lot of times it's been about 12 years now. I started when I didn't have any sense. To a time now, when I know the difference between an Excel sheet that's just an Excel sheet and something that makes so much difference but probably will never be able to be represented on an Excel sheet. I think we've just come on a journey where my questions have become more than the answers that I know. Last night, for example, was a night when I broke down. Since morning, I think for 13 hours we were on the ground, and oxygen cylinders, this, that, all of that. And ideally, we are supposed to be a small organization because we choose to be a small organization, right? But since last year, I think we are in no position to have that choice of being small. Very, 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 very consciously, we never wanted to grow up because we've also seen some very large organizations, somewhere losing that why. And I think, but since last year, there was no choice that was left to organizations such as ours. And why we do what we do. So we started working with, children, little girls that we started rescuing from brothels, from begging points. And, and I only knew art. I only knew photography, filmmaking, or, things like that, which are like art, and I think from that point to this point where we know that art heals, right? To kind of even make that thing or that statement that yeah, healing is possible. And a child who's been the conversations around mental health and survivor centric approaches and all of that are fine, but all you really need is a caregiver who can just be with the child, who also knows that why. So I think why we do what we do is pretty much because we only have courage as our capital. Excel sheets and laws we have learned along the way. FCRAs and subgrunting and not subgrunting, all of these you will learn along the way if some young people are joining us. Now I have a lot of white hair, but I think when I started, I was just this 24, 23-year-old, with a lot of tattoos. So people in the ministry never took me seriously until 5 years back. But I think if your why is there in your heart and soul, it'll show in your work. You will not have to, and it's not arrogance about what you do. I think as women, as probably some of the people here would, concur with that. As women, if we are stronger and we know our why even more strongly, I think we'll be called arrogant. We'll be called, you're like, you're too sure of what you're doing. But I think that's the beauty of what we do and why we do what we do. So your whys have to be strong, even if people feel that it's arrogance. It's okay.
I love that, Sonal. Thank you so much for sharing that. The whole point about courage as your capital and that being the primary and the core space that you function from. Thank you so much for beginning with that. I'm going to move over to Naghma and ask Naghma about why she's doing what she's doing, and tell us a little bit about why you think that kindness needs to be at the absolute core of everything that you're doing at the EdelGive Foundation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for such a refreshing topic, for getting such wonderful women on this panel, and also for I know the kind of questions I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone speak. But if I have to go back a little bit, I think whatever I am now, and I can say that for some of the people I know at least, is a product of kindness received at very critical points in my life. And if every, no matter what happened or what did not happen, there are some key people who were kind just when it mattered, and who extended themselves for me in a personal capacity when, and just changed the trajectory of my life. So I'm a direct product of people just opening up their hearts to me, and nudging me just a little here and there at the right times in my life. About a decade ago, when EdelGive happened, I wasn't sure about the sector. I had still to learn a lot. But what I found phenomenal is that we were speaking of the grassroots. A little bit of travel is all that it took for me to understand that, oh my God, there is, for everything gloomy and for all the bad that is happening, there is actually this tsunami of brilliant, kind, quiet people who just do what they do, and they don't have to be professionals. They just have to be good, fathers, good citizens. And there are people like that. Cut to after a whole decade, what actually is phenomenally exciting for me is that my faith in that kindness and humanity, not just in the sector, but in this world, has been reinforced again and again. But what I find very distressing, really, is that we are supposed representatives of the development sector. We find, but somewhere, and we work with human beings. Human beings are our products. I'm sorry, but everything we do is with human beings. But somewhere, even in our language, even in our approach, in our strategies, we've invisibilized human beings, and therefore we've invisibilized humanity, because everything is now project deliverables. We've processized it to a point where we've dehumanized the most important agent of any change that we want to do, which is the human being. And that is, and maybe all for the good, but it's something that's a very sad byproduct of getting really strategic. I don't think it's impossible to navigate ourselves back and root ourselves back into just basic, good, decent behavior while we follow all the processes that we do. So I think EdelGive tries that really hard. We still work with the small and medium-sized organizations. We see kindness reaffirmed every day, and that's why we do what we do.
Loving that, Naghma, your emphasis on working with small and medium-sized organizations, and also what you said about how we have deep dived to the extent that we have into structure, and that we've forgotten the whole humane aspect of it, and how as torchbearers and as representatives of the social sector or the development space, it's pertinent that we bring that kindness forward even in our vocabulary and everything that we're setting out to do. On that note, I'm going to shift the focus to Devyani Kacker, who's here with us today. And Devyani, you have this incredible background in the space of bringing justice to the fore and actually engaging with legal frameworks. And if you could talk a little bit about how kindness needs to be at the core of something like that, because law is such a make or break thing for so many people. Can you share a little bit from your journey?
Are you able to hear me? I was having some trouble unmuting myself. Technology is great, isn't it? When it wants to help and it doesn't want to help. Thank you so much for having me here, firstly. I'm grateful to OFC for organizing this great panel, and then to bring Sonal, Mitali, and Naghma on this panel. I mean, people I have admired from far and followed and interacted with in different capacities. It's really just quite the pleasure. And the attendees as well, some friends and some people who have looked up to, a shout out to Neha Butch there. I've known her since I was 18, I think, and a large part of what I do is inspired by what she does. So it's really just like Naghma said, people who helped you along in your journey. I think with law, it's similar to what Naghma was saying. It dehumanizes people, right? We start looking at them through codes and procedures. And I myself, when I was practicing, stop pushing the envelope after a point. Even if you are a distressed woman, a lot of times you would hide behind the law and say, this is not possible. The judge is not going to agree. You have to modify your behavior or your expectations of what you can get, rather than push the envelope and say, no, actually, there's a problem with the system and we need to push to change the system. What I think the justice sector across the world lacks is empathy. It's not, kindness is a big word, but empathy is one thing that people really need to push for. You need to tell judges, lawyers, paralegal volunteers, put yourself in the shoes of the person who's in front of you and you will see things differently. Let's for a second try and imagine what a under trial prisoner is going through when he is waiting for trial for 7-8 years, or even someone who has committed a really heinous crime. We have no idea where that is coming from, what his experiences or her experiences have been. We are so quick to judge, so quick to pass judgment. It's empathy really that I feel we lack, and we see that in our everyday interactions, not just in law. You read about a rapist in the paper and you're quick to judge him without for a second looking beyond what has been reported, beyond even saying that everybody has a right to a fair trial, everybody has a right to a defense. So it's not just limited to law in a sense, it goes beyond our everyday interactions as well. But kindness is a revolution, and I'm so glad we're talking about it today.
Thank you for that, Devyani, and the emphasis of empathy and kindness from every lens, and right from the judge to how we perceive people who get branded as miscreants or as delinquents or as criminals. Thank you for bringing up that point. It is extremely important for us to be able to build our perspective on this as well. Mitali, moving to you and how you use your space, especially through social media, to be able to bring light to issues of importance, how vulnerable and open you've been in the public space, and how and why you think kindness needs to be at the core of what you're doing and what people like you are doing.
Hi, everyone. Again, thank you for having me here. Before I actually move on to answering your question, I feel it's important for me to define what radical kindness means to me. For the simple reason that it has been at the core of everything I do. It's been at the core of all of my on-ground politics, whether in the development sector, whether at protests, or being vulnerable on social media and talking about politics there. So for me, if I have to define the terms radical kindness and what they mean in idea and action, and how I like to embody them, here's what I have to say. To define radical, I'd actually like to quote Angela Davis when she says that radical means, simply understanding the cause or the root of something. And I know radical as a term, we've sort of abused it in the public sphere. We've given it a bad name when it just has a very simple meaning, just trying to understand the cause for something and not just the consequence. So, when we as citizens, looking at what's going on in the country, looking at especially the situation of the pandemic, we say, the healthcare infrastructure is failing, people don't have oxygen, people don't have ICU beds. And while we're complaining about these individual components, we're not taking that one step ahead and saying that the cause of this, the root of this, is capitalism, it is fascism. And I feel to be a radical means acknowledging the cause and not just the consequence, because till the time we don't solve causes, we're not radicals and we're not revolutionaries, and we cannot really make a dent in the system, because these issues are not just individual, right? They're systemic. Coming to kindness, I feel kindness for me always has been an act of extending care, extending empathy, and extending love. When I think of these terms, for me, they're not just nouns, they're verbs. They're things you have to be constantly and relentlessly doing. They're not just abstract ideas. They're things one has to put in action at all points of time. So, in fact, to everybody who's listening here, and before I move on, I really want to ask you that when I say care, what are the acts that come into your mind where you have been cared for? And I'd really like everybody to write that in the chat box, whether you want to open it up to everyone, just send it to me or the panelists. I'd really like to read that. What does it mean to have care extended towards you as an act? So for me, when it comes to radical kindness, it means that I have to be looking at the systemic causes, and it means that I have to constantly extend care. I would like to do that through direct action, through mutual aid, through setting up better communities, and through taking care of each other. I feel community care and collective care needs to be at the root of everything, because when we talk of isolationism, it's not just true in the pandemic. The pandemic has only heightened an isolationism we feel under systems of capitalism. This term that we throw around of self-care, as important as it is, we actually deserve to be taken care of. We deserve collective care. We deserve community care. We deserve people being there for each other. Like Devyani said, extending empathy, extending compassion. And that's what we need of our societies. And as somebody who's been involved on ground and on social media, I do what I do because what exists is not right. And people deserve better. People don't just deserve, a basic life or their basic needs to be fulfilled. They actually deserve a chance, and they deserve better lifestyles. They deserve pleasure and not just basic fulfillment of what they need. They deserve for their wants to be fulfilled. And I feel that's a radical idea. I wish I did not have to do what I do. I wish I did not have to sit and organize protests, because protests being a part of our society does not just mean that we have the right to dissent. It also means that the system is failing, and therefore we have to voice out. And I wish that I did not have to do what I do, but I'm doing it because people deserve better.
I think we're seeing some major reactions in the chat box to that. Mitali, thank you so much for engaging the audience and for all the points that you just brought up. The fact that you addressed radical kindness, and it's exactly what I'm moving into now, which is how kindness can't be this ideal and this lofty idea and this very beautiful term. It can't be a one-day thing, a one-time thing, a weekend hobby, or like a side-by passion to be able to make a difference. It's essential for us to be able to put this into action on a daily basis and to bring consistency and format and structure into this kindness. What I sense here with all of our speakers is that there is some element of pain, there is some element of anger, which we are completely unapologetic about, and I absolutely love that. I'm going to direct my next question, which is about how kindness and radical kindness is so aptly addressed by Mitali and brought up by Mitali, cannot be a part-time affair. And it is exhausting sometimes to be able to function at that plain at all times. But Sonal, I'm going to throw that question your way and ask you a little bit about how being unapologetic, being angry, questioning things, being able to center stage things which are ideally being brushed aside is a part of the kindness that we are talking about today.
I think all the tough questions are being put to me first. And it's okay for me to say that, I don't have the best answers or the perfect answers. All I can really say is that, yes, it's not a weekend hobby. When I started with it, I remember just into advertising, filmmaking, whatever, little bit I was doing. I loved what I was doing. I was completely in the creative industry space. First job immediately after MBA, and then going into this place that we were shooting at, and then finding this 36, 37-year-old young mother, I would say, with her sixth child, who was being sent to a brothel, 8-year-old, 7.5, 8-year-old girl. And she was also very visibly, heavily pregnant. And I remember, something had happened at the shoot, just cutting the very long story short. And I was angry with what had happened at the shoot. And I just had a little, at those times, we used to have those Sony digital pixel cameras. And I just had that, and I just moved away from the scene, that I'm not going to be a part of that. And I was angry in my head. So what happens with me is, if I'm angry, that emotion immediately transforms into sadness and I cry. But for that particular day, so it's funny because people, outside, they go, oh, Protsahan and Sonal, oh yeah, she's very strong. I'm not. And I have no qualms to admit and stand here and say that after 8, 10, 20 days of looking at the pain and suffering, I need one day to just I don't know, whatever emotion that would come out like. So that similarly on that particular day, I remember, just having this chat with this mother, and this mother tells me, so my question to her was that, this, once I got to know, okay, so how do I cut the long story short? So when this little kid was bringing me chai for that particular day, I remember us din us ghar mein full cream doodh ki chai bani thi, which is a luxury, and this kid is bringing me chai on a tray. This is a very urban slum cluster in Delhi. I'm not talking about, this is the capital city of the country, where this is placed. And this kid, anybody would walk like this, right? This kid was walking like this with the chai and the tray in her hands. And I was sitting and chatting with a mother, already angry with what I'd seen at the site of the shoot. And I asked the mom, isko khelte hue chot lag gayi hai. Has she fallen down while playing? Is she okay? And the mother says, as a matter of fact, nahi, nahi, every 3 or 4, nahi, she'll be okay. And then I, kind of I'm having this conversation with her. And this mother tells me that every 3 or 4 days, some gentleman comes and takes her away. And it took me like 30 seconds, 40 seconds to really understand what gentleman, who takes her away what, until she said that, nahi, hum kandam mandam dete hain, so zyada tension ki baat nahi hai. And the more she spoke about it, and I had begun to sip the chai, I never knew कि मैं उस चाय का ऋण कभी चुका पाऊंगी. I never knew whether I can pay back what I just had chai with, what kind of money did I have that chai. I don't know how kindness or social entrepreneurship is defined or discussed, or I don't know. I don't know definitions. I mean, even now, for the longest time, I don't know how entrepreneurship was spelled or, kind of colloquially, pronounced. I always used to say entrepreneurship until I realized somebody corrected me. It's entrepreneurship. I was like, because the semantics of what we do have become so important, that why we do what we do, all of that has kind of just gotten lost somewhere. And in this space of, I would say that even if, your kindness lasts for a weekend, which is about creating an app that would probably connect the volunteers or the oxygen supply demand things that we are seeing, that kindness for a weekend is also valid. Not everybody can be in the social sector, leave their jobs, do something. But when that instance happens, when I ask the mother, what is it that you're going to do with the 7th baby which is in your womb, and she tells me that, as a matter of fact, because she's already sending one kid to a brothel to feed the rest of the 5 or 6 other daughters, she tells me that if it's a boy, I'm going to bring him up, get him educated, but this time if it's a girl, I'll strangle her the minute she's born. And I think, on times like that, on moments like that, definitions, weekend affairs, I didn't know whether I would quit my job 3 months down the line and, do what I started doing. But now, a decade later, looking back, connecting the dots, if somebody would have told me these are the FCRA laws and this is the POXO law and this is what you have to read, I would have been like, thanks, I would just probably volunteer for a weekend. But the fact that I didn't know any of that, I think not knowing a lot of things is a very good thing some days. Take it in your stride. You don't have to know, you don't have to have answers for everything. You will figure the answers on the journey. You will fail, you will falter, you will fall, and all of that is okay. You will crumble, you will be vulnerable, you will cry. I used to write, we used to come back some days, and out of 10 kids we would rescue 3 or 4, and 6 kids we would not be able to rescue no matter what, because the mother would side with the, for example, in an incest case, she would side with the father. When we would go to the corporates, Naghma would probably spank me here, but I think when we would go to the corporates, people would be like, oh, that's a long-term affair, and then, for 2 years, I was in a space where I said, oh, CSRs don't understand anything, corporate, until the 3rd, 4th, 5th year, when I said, hey, this is not what I am, I'm not, putting that right across, somewhere along, I think there is immense amount of help available, there is immense amount of kindness available, but sometimes we take our vulnerabilities to a point where we say, hey, the world doesn't work. I think as Fred Rogers' mother says, that in this any massive amount of crisis, it's always, there'll always be angels, there'll always be helpers. Look for those helpers. Yes, we're going to falter, fall, fail, cry, all of that, but take it in your stride, because it's not because, oh, it's going to make you stronger. Probably it's going to make you weaker. But I don't know. The whole point being, just be aware of what you're going through, if you can be, because that awareness will translate into kindness, which will translate into action. Even if it's for 4 days, I think it's good enough.
Thank you for that. Very different perspective, because it's often seen that good social impact driven work is something that needs to be done over a long period of time, and that just doing shorter stints of it is sometimes not enough. But very pertinent points over there, and I think extremely empowering what you shared with us. On that note, I'd also just like to issue a couple of trigger warnings. We have some stellar people on the panel with us today, and they come from various walks of life. They work in the space of law and legality frameworks. They work in the space of interacting directly with NGOs, with victims of abuse and trafficking, and also vulnerabilities to do with LGBTQIA. So just putting that out there for our listeners who've joined us today. Moving on to Naghma. Naghma, some of the points that Sonal brought up, and just threw some light on with regard to how it's not important to get, to know every single thing. And it's absolutely important for us to be able to remain open in our journeys as we sort of traverse the various challenges and roadblocks that come our way. You're somebody, and for those of you who are listening, Naghma is also my boss at the EdelGive Foundation. You're somebody who is incredibly open to asking for help and to learning as you proceed. Why is that important, and how has that helped you from getting stuck or becoming stagnant in this journey of applying kindness into your daily work? If you could share a little bit about that, the need to remain open, the need to be able to reach out, ask for help, not get stuck in the structurizing of things, and still sort of going strong.
Yeah. So Riddhi, I don't know anybody who knows everything, and I don't know anyone who's figured it out. So whatever it is, I haven't met them and I can't see them. So I think and as soon as that becomes clear, as soon as we stop taking and I don't mean, the phrase stop taking ourselves seriously is very problematic to me, because I think we don't take ourselves seriously enough. But when I'm using it in this context, I'm saying that, pressurizing ourselves to be a particular version, Sonal, I 100% agree. And I'm so glad you said what you said. But I would counter just one thing that you said, that because you break down every 20 days does not make you in any way weak. It is a sign of absolute strength. And courage comes from getting up after being vulnerable. And it is not about whether we ever get vulnerable or not. So I think enough of us have to appreciate the fact that vulnerability is almost like this comma in a sentence. It is that much needed pause. And if you embrace your vulnerability, and if you're fairly open that, yes, I'm flawed, just like everyone is, and the only way to work on a flaw is to look at it from more lenses. And we are so close to ourselves. Sometimes, the lenses are really blurred. I mean, who thinks that they have a weak sense of humor? I mean, I think everybody thinks they're funny. Everybody thinks they're good people, because that's how we see it. But if there's in any way, if life needs to improve, if our work needs to improve, if we need to move from point A to point B, I don't know how that will happen with just our own voice in our own heads. It can't be. And secondly, we are such a small speck in the whole scheme of things. We see only with our two eyes, we experience only with our own five senses. If we don't latch on to the others, how will our experience grow? How will our minds grow? How will it just, I mean, for me, it is such an intuitive, no-brainer things, and it has only made my life richer. Being open to asking for help encourages others to ask for help too. You have a network of beautiful people who are not scared to say we need help. And if you can create that kind of environment within your teams, I think that's enough. The question that cause and consequence and everyone has to be kind all the time, it's not possible. We all believe in kindness, but we all have everything from bad moods to bad days to bad judgment. We snap when we don't want to snap. It is an extremely pressurizing environment, and we behave less than stellar many times. I mean, at least I do. I'm not, while you believe in a set of principles, it's not always, we are not always that exceptional version of ourselves, right? No matter what we believe. So being able to say it's okay, as long as we accept we are in the wrong or we are weak and we need other people to make us stronger and pull us out of it, is what I think is important. And we cannot possibly change the entire world, but we at least can change the ecosystem we are in. I believe in that. If we have a position of even a little power, to use it to infuse this kind of positivity, this kind of openness to vulnerability in our environments, it goes a long way. I've only seen it work positively. For me, there's no flip side to this.
I love how we're talking about being okay and being good towards ourselves, and how that's coming from a space of having gone through this whole rut of being told that snap out of this, stop thinking about yourself, you're not the center of everything. Thank you for bringing that vociferousness that you do to everything, Naghma. Devyani, over to you, and to sort of hear from you what you think some of the oppressive structures or major challenges are in the work that you do, especially when you're trying to do something from the space of goodness and not just namesake, not just to clear one more case or not just to push one more project ahead. What are the core sort of challenges that come your way, or the roadblocks that you perceive?
That's like a long list. It's fighting a lot of perceptions. For example, if you want to work on, say, tax penalty, the first step is to convince so many people that it's not a good thing. And then you move on to fighting preconceived notions, to questions of morality come into play into almost everything with law. And I don't know how many fights I've had with people where I've said a state is judged by the way it treats its most vulnerable, and say, for example, prisoners could be your most vulnerable. As a state actor, you have to be above, you are judged on a higher plane, right? You have to do better. It's not like you and me as individuals. So there's that. But there's also, if you take yourself out of single cases, as you said, if you're trying to change a system, the pace of change is very, 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 very slow. And sometimes it becomes hard to convince people to keep doing it, to keep hitting their head against that wall. And I think there was someone who said, right, you sometimes go to war because you have to go to war, not because you're going to win or lose. And those are the things with fair trials and the right to defense and the right to be heard, right to be seen, right to have a constitution, right to have fundamental rights. These are, I mean, I feel so helpless these days that in 70 years, where we should have gone to speaking of socio-economic rights, we have gone back a century to start talking about political freedoms again. And that to me is frustrating, that how have we regressed, and how have we regressed so badly, and how have we gone even below the floor that we had. So the list is long, but the fight is there. And what is encouraging is young people like you, right? That you're there to fight it, and you're there to say, no, we will not take no for an answer, and we will push this envelope. And what I love about my job, I joined the philanthropy a year back, and working at a philanthropy is new for me. I've always been on the work side of it, right? Being in court or being on the field, but this time I'm on the other side, and I get to meet all these great people doing all this great work, and they don't need a pat on the back. They don't want a prize. They don't want a medal. They're just there doing what needs to be done. And that to me is inspiring, and it keeps me excited about the work I do. So despite all the negatives, there's just so much positivity to look at.
The very fact that you say that the list is endless and you still end with such positivity and with such excitement about that fight, acknowledging for a minute that that fight is a very real thing that all of us do on a daily basis. It's not a once in a year thing. It's not an every quarter thing. It is a daily thing that so many of us actually experience. And coming to so much of what all four of you have been saying in different ways, which is to not nullify and to wipe away, wash away the anger. I feel like rage is such a crucial part about everything that we're talking about. And even for me as a person, there is deep peace that I experience in my anger and in my rage. And I find that my anger and my rage makes me who I am. Spotlight to Mitali, because I sense that there's more that Mitali can share about this, and how pain and anger need also to be channelized and need to be put out there, versus always looking at some sort of a rosy picture which makes everybody comfortable. And whatever you'd like to talk about in that space, Mitali, because you've been interacting with people directly via your social media pages as well. And there's so much that we see as engagement on these issues of putting out very raw, authentic emotions. Mitali, you're on mute.
Yeah, so I was just unmuting myself. Thank you for that question, honestly, because I feel rage for me has been a very driving emotion to do what I do. And so has grief been this emotion. I think especially for marginalized identities, we don't really know how to express rage in a way we see maybe oppressor groups expressing it. So for example, if I just look at the gendered way in which rage is felt or expressed, then you see that, say, cis men, they can be aggressive when it comes to their rage, but I see most marginalized identities actually either crying or feeling helpless as an expression of their rage. And for me, rage has always been something that I want to channel in order to demand better. And personally, for me and for the lives I look at, so much of our work has been driven by grief. So much has been driven by either being exploited ourselves or looking at the people closest to us being exploited. In the past 1 year, I know people in double digits, my own friends who have been picked up. Like, fair trigger warnings, this is about state oppression. I don't want to go into details in order to like make this heavy for anyone, but my own friends who've been picked up. There are my friends who are still in jail. There are people we are still demanding be released. And to constantly hold the state accountable, to not let this become a moment of collective amnesia is important. It is important that we do not forget, because it is our amnesia that leads us towards inaction. You know, when we talk about being radical also means that we have to remember that no work of care can be done without justice. And one cannot even expect radical care from oppressed groups till the time justice is not served. It's extremely unfair. You know, I feel we're privileged that we can sit here and we can talk about extending care, but how do you as a marginalized identity you extend care to an oppressor group of yours? I had this discussion with some of my friends yesterday, friends who come from very obviously they're marginalized, because I honestly still hold a bunch of privileges. And I had this discussion with them, and in fact, I noted down what they have to say. And I don't think it's my place to say it, so I will only amplify what was told to me. And just to give you all a fair idea about um, what groups these people come from, they're trans women I spoke to, they're people from the Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi community. And this is, I think, a collective response or a summary of their response, where they told me that marginalized identities must practice radical kindness within themselves, within their communities, but it should not be expected that we lend this to our oppressor groups. While it's true that they owe kindness to other people as virtue of being human beings, as virtue of being caretakers, because a lot of people I spoke to are in caretaking professions. They're either doctors or they're teachers or they're social workers. And while they owe that as fellow human beings, they don't really they're not at a place where they feel that any justice has been served to them for them to not remain angry towards their oppressor groups. And I think it's extremely important for us to acknowledge what the limitations to care are too, and how we can keep using our anger, for kindness, for compassion. It is so important that we hold people accountable. That too is an act of care. That end up we end up being angry at people. That too is an act of care. The fact that we can acknowledge that we deserve better from people who are supposed to love us, who are supposed to take care of us, our governments are they're not diplomatic tools. They're not just institutions of power. They're caregivers. They should be caregivers. Their work should be rooted in love. And today, if I'm angry and if I'm taking to the streets or if I'm taking to social media and saying that I deserve better, it is me acknowledging that my humanity deserves to be recognized by someone who claims that they care for me. And this too is an act of care. Anger, 100% is an act of care.
Wow. Like, are you reading that? Is this just coming out of you? That is incredibly well put. And I think there's so many of us who are resonating with it because of how raw and authentic that is, Mitali. Center staging rage, anger, pain, acknowledging grief as a part of our journeys and things that drove us to do what we're doing is essential. But I want to talk a little bit more about also making peace with privilege as we work in the space of amplifying kindness and really putting it as a goal. So now not coming to you anymore, heading over to Naghma first, and then coming to you. Naghma, this whole thing about making peace with privilege, there's a recent piece that you wrote about how this present situation around us, and you ended it by saying something like how it's not a test for those who are actually in the midst of all the pain and suffering. it's a test of those and on those who aren't suffering and who are in the space of privilege and who are actually tiding through quite effortlessly. And how some of us who are possibly hypersensitive, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all, but some of us who feel so deeply, what it does to us to A, look at somebody in pain, and B, acknowledge that I am not in pain. Something about that, if you could just throw some light and talk about how it's important for us to recognize that, make peace with that as a way of a personal project or being kind to ourselves. Because if we're not kind to ourselves, there's no chance that we're going to be able to make any sort of a ripple outside.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've written it just yesterday. It came out of a lot of the same churn that's going on amongst all of us these days. There's too much happening, and I think everything was already happening. Is just being pressure tested right now, and we're facing things that we would have otherwise faced over a decade, maybe are happening in like a week's time. But Riddhi, to give context to this, when I first moved into the sector, I was born, bred in Bombay. I was and very, very protected. And then because of my work, I went to, let me not even go far away. I had a deep immersion exercise in the M ward. And I know that their experience was a shock to my senses. One, because of what I saw, similar experiences to what Sonal was sharing when a survivor barely raped a couple of days ago is actually serving. The mother is speaking. It's normalized in this whole surreal. It's like a horror film where people who've gone through something have accepted it as part of fate. And I just couldn't get over the fact that I was born, raised maybe 5 kilometers away from this place, and I had no clue. And I had the luxury of being shocked and awed, and by the courage of this person, and I was embarrassed simply by even calling it awe. I mean, it was just deep admiration, but huge shame that I didn't even know something like this existed, and that I actually was in a position to take inspiration for this. It made me feel extremely disgusted with myself, and I've had that whole phase of making peace with my past, and saying, yes, I do come from a place of having more than I probably deserved in that part of my life. And then there's a whole phase of reconciliation, after which here I am almost more than a decade later. And what I've realized is there are 2-3 ways to do this. You can see people in grief, you can make the right noises, and you can go back and do things to basically de-stress and figure out the larger pleasures in life, and still feel good about it, because you've been kind in that moment and you stepped out, and now you're making peace with your own life again. And the other is to really do something about it. Even in the doing, I think there are 2 things. One is we can do it with this weight on our shoulders that, I don't know why she deserves it, and I don't know why I've been spared. And that survivor's guilt is something we all carry all the time. And it's humongous, it's overburdening, and it can take away your sleep and peace. And I think, it can make life very miserable. But I think there is another way, and which is what I wrote about yesterday, is that we are all part of a journey that we don't always choose. We've seen experiences that have happened to us. We've not always had the privilege of choosing, but we've had the privilege of experiencing the good things in life. Now, it is what it is. But what's more important is, what do I do now with whatever I have in my hands, whatever I can do? Like I said, I'm not aiming to go and change the world, but can I aim to change what is in my hands first? Because all good change starts from there. It starts from, so being at peace with who you are is the beginning of what you can do. So the first kindness one must have is for oneself, and being okay with one's privilege is part of that, because only then you can extend it to others. Being apologetic about our past does nothing. It just gives us huge amount of guilt. It pressurizes us. Everything that we do also doesn't really give us joy the way it can. But being okay with it, being completely fine with who we are, and then saying, yes, I am going to extend it to whoever I can, because I am gifted with a privilege. I think we have to be okay with it. We have to be completely okay with, be sensitive, want to share it with most people as possible. Do things to multiply it. Do things to find your tribe. Do things to magnify it in whichever way possible, And everyone here in this panel has done the same thing. But we can either choose it, choose to do it with huge burden on our own selves, or we can choose to do it happier so that we just do it 10 times better. And that's why yesterday I said that even the pandemic, there's so much grief that sometimes it's like, your heart is going to burst open and there's just no point in, you can all get paralyzed with this grief. But the point is there are other people suffering and we're here watching, and it's in our hands to do something about it. Now we can't feel bad that we can't feel survivor's guilt. That's too much luxury. Beyond the survivor's guilt is the survivor's action. What are we going to do? And that can only come when we're fine with being a survivor first, instead of just tripping ourselves with guilt and getting paralyzed with immobility because, oh my god, it's too much, I just don't want to see the news because it's too traumatic. So I think that reconciliation is to start with oneself.
Thank you for that, Naghma. And I do want to sort of reiterate that point about how we need to move past that guilt, even as Mitali sort of reiterated in the chat box, that we've got to move past that guilt and get into the space of more constructive channelizing of that gift, of that unique skill set, of that privilege, to be able to get on with our lives and not feel like, why me and why am I the lucky one versus somebody else. Sonal, coming to you and speaking a little bit about, taking it on from where Naghma's left it, if you'd like to throw some light on the idea of security and the idea of safety being core to kindness, and why, as Mitali said, everyone deserves to have not just your basic roti kapra makan, but also that overarching theme of mental well-being amidst several other things. And some of the work that you do at Protsahan does center stage things like art and alternate therapies. And you're not just looking at ensuring that someone is rescued from a setup, but you're going way beyond that. And if you'd like to talk about the elements of kindness within that.
I think because one of the core, just trying to answer again, I'm just making an attempt to answer that very amazing question that you asked, Riddhi. And I think one of the things that forms the core of how we try to tackle that question is that somewhere believing that weaponization of suffering will only impede healing. You cannot I'm not saying that when we started working with these children or these girls, almost all the not all, maybe 85-90% of the bachas we work with are girls, right? And a lot of times we, in the beginning, we got clinical psychologists, we brought in academicians also to look at a lot of how we were doing the frameworks. So that was one, maybe a 15% part of the thinking part of what we were trying to do of the 75-85% on the ground. But I think a lot of times when we bring in too much of academics, when we try and bring in too much of theoretical frameworks, I'm not saying they're bad. Sometimes the structure will be our guiding light to kind of really take action on the ground, yes. But I think when we are too anal about it, more oftentimes than not, especially today, I can speak about the sector that we belong to, that we represent. I think too much of theoretical frameworks are only weaponizing that suffering. They are only impeding, and everything will not be solved by an app. Let's be honest, right? And I think this is something that in my conversation with Kamla Bhasin, who also had a birthday yesterday, who's one of my people I look up to. She says that मुझे एक किसी गांव में कुआं लगाना था, and one of the first projects that she did, and she felt that I will get 10,000 rupees sanctioned and I will khodo a kuan and it'll be done. But when she got there was when she realized it's a gender issue. Why men, women? Okay, if women, then it's a caste issue. uchi jaat, nichi jaat, right? After the caste, it is, there is a subdivision of caste system. Okay, once the caste is taken care of, then there are other 5 intersectionalities to look at. So I think the fact that, sometimes we are able to do things is because we don't let too much of theoretical frameworks and too much of academics impede that understanding. So again, I'm saying that with a rider. I'm not saying ignorance is a great thing, but I'm saying sometimes when we are not we don't let ourselves be entangled in too many things. It's a good thing, because let's also try and understand. I remember taking some law classes, and our professor constantly talking about, the law is great, the constitution says for such tremendous things in the country, etc. And the one thing that was constantly coming to my mind, which I keep sharing all the time, which I think somewhere Mitali also focused on, but just putting it into a little more one liner, is that access to law and access to justice are two very different things, right? And somewhere we need to realize that, these conversations that we are having about kindness and empathy and all of that, and justice for that matter, peace will not exist without true justice. And we need to understand that true justice will not exist without compassion, and somewhere along, and I think each of us, the minute we understand that, yeah, okay, theoretical frameworks will be important some days, but if we are only guided by that, that is not going to lead us to be able to do anything. I'm just going to give you an example. So, a lot of times, in the beginning, for example, we used to do a lot of our work, like I said, is with adolescent girls, right, from marginalized communities. And then with, something that we started working. Again, this is a terminology, vocabulary bit that we learned, that we are not working for them, that we are working with them, we are working alongside them, right? And the minute these little realizations start coming to you, that you are not the white woman who's gone in a jungle in Africa and trying to, dig up resources and save those people there who are natives there. Because even the biggest of the guys, even the most well-intentioned guys, like, right, they end up having the savior complex. How do we, and it's not right or wrong to have it. It's just important to be in constant awareness of it, because the minute you're aware of your vulnerability, your weakness, or whatever, like I think, like Naghma said, the minute you become aware is the minute you will switch it off, or turn that switch. Agar aap aware hi nahi ho, that this is something that you've done wrong, or this is because all of us, these things that we are doing in the country, ideally it should be done by the governments, right? Ideally none of us should be existing and doing the kind of things that we are doing. We should be probably talking about the well-being piece, which I'm going to come to now, right? Because when we started, we were not starting on the zero on the number line, we were starting at -5. So when you're starting at a -5 or a -10, taking it to zero first is one chapter. Then taking it from 0 to 1 is another chapter that will take you a few years. And then from 1 to 8 is where, we can, that's where the well-being piece comes in our setup or space of things. Because when you start working with art and films and photography and, things like that, that's not the core of our work. But yeah, about 800 survivors that we work with every day, you can only give them as much roti, kapda, makan, protein kits, learning kits, right? They need compassion, they need justice, they need compensation, that, for how and why they were wronged. They need some caregiving, some adult who just says, yeah, I believe in you, you were not wrong, I will handhold you on this journey. And leave alone a survivor who's gone through so much of madness. Each of us, let me speak about 4, 5, 6 people on the panel. Each of us has wanted, like Naghma said, right, somebody has been kind to us, somebody has invested in us, and somewhere we feel, वो अगर मैं उस दिन उस फुल क्रीम दूध की चाय पी के मुझे अगर नहीं लगता कि मुझे ये ऋण कैसे चुकाना है, I don't know how will I ever pay back. I don't know, and there are still times when you think you've not given back enough, right? Maybe that's not the right terminology as well, but I think without getting lost in the semantics of things, the well-being piece will come when the -5 to 0 wala journey has been taken care of. And in that well-being piece is when, you can experiment with creativity, you can experiment with, art and films and, songs and, things which make us who we are. Roti kapda is great. It needs us to kind of breathe, but survival is one thing, surviving is one thing, thriving is another. And before, a lot of times, even last year, when we transformed a lot of our community centers in the urban slums where we work, a lot of that just like literally within 3 days or within overnights, they got transformed into COVID relief centers. It was like we never expected we will end up feeding 4 lakh people, right? And this is not, again, understanding the intersectionality. Is that a one time when we're saying, oh, 4 lakh people we are fed, how responsibly are we putting those numbers out? Is it that one time meal of one time reaching 4 lakh people? That doesn't make sense then, right? Or is it 3 months of sustainable meals for 4 lakh people for 3 months? Because that is something that that will help them tide over. So I think that well-being comes with that understanding of intersectionality and creativity, and of course with a lot of empathy. Uske bina, I think any solution that we look at, it can be short term, it can be long term. I mean, that completely depends on the case scenarios that we are looking at. But we, as an underlying thing, I think empathy, creativity, and intersectionality, uske bina we will never be able to understand and do justice to what we are doing. And if no justice, then there's no peace ever.
I am seeing a lot of merchandise be developed at the end of this panel. A lot of quotes that I would wear on t-shirts, a lot of things that I would put up in my room. This is just incredible. There is so much which is emerging with this discussion. It's just, as a moderator, I'm just like, मेरे को लाया क्यों है? आप लोग बात करो. But we're coming to Devyani. Devyani, Sonal brought up a couple of points around access to justice and access to legal aid or legal assistance. And I also wanted to ask you about how and what needs to be done to be able to build the element of care into the legal system so that it's more accessible, so that it's more empathetic, and so that it's not such a barrier. So many of us stay away from, and okay, this is a very nascent and sort of a fringe understanding of how legal frameworks work, but so many of us are apprehensive of anything to do with legalities and law and aspects of justice. There is such a barrier. What needs to be done to be able to plummet into a space of more care and empathy within these frameworks?
So, Riddhi, I think you're doing such a great job, and you're just downplaying everything you're doing here, right? By saying, why do I need to moderate? I don't think this would work otherwise. So thank you. I'm going to actually take a leaf out of Sonal's book and say that law creates internal barriers because it hides behind words, right? We need people like Sonal who say, I'm going to do it. I will figure it out, right? And I'll tell you why this is important, because we need people to come and break the mold. If you're not going to think out of the box, if you're not going to apply different ideas, different strategies, then we'll be on the straight and narrow path and we'll be where we are. I mean, if we are not going to question, if we are not going to really get into each and every thread of this, my world opened up when I traveled to Cambodia, right? This is after I did law, and I went there and I went to the Genocide Museum there. It's a school. If anybody it's a museum. It's a Genocide Museum is online, so I suggest you look at it. And this happened between 1974 and 1978, where 1.3 million people were exterminated in Cambodia. And Cambodia is next to us, and we didn't know. We studied Germany, we studied the Nuremberg trials, but we didn't know this happened. And I felt like I am a lawyer and I am what I would say a well-read person. And it made me look inside me and say, how much do I even know of my own country, right? I know of the partition, but do I know of all the riots and what I call atrocity crimes that take place in our country on an almost daily basis? And it has nothing to do with the BJP or the current dispensation. This has been going on day in and day out since we have been a country. And what have we done about it? Nothing, right? So it took an internal sort of epiphany for me to step back a second and say, this is not right. We need to go back to what we are learning, what we perceive as law. Is having a constitution sufficient? Right? Constitution, it's enough. No, it's not, right? So we need to push the envelope. So that's one thing. But I also want to talk about the concept of justice, right? What can we do? Because what is justice after all? To me, justice may be getting a positive order for my client. But for the client, is that justice? Maybe today, yes. But tomorrow, that person may need a house. Maybe after she gets a house, she says, but why did this happen to me? Why was I let down? Why was I let down maybe by my husband? Why was I let down by my neighbors? Why was I let down by my children? Why was I let down by the state? And then, so then you come to the concept of truth. And then from truth, you move on to acceptance, rehabilitation, mental peace. Um, how do we bring all these elements into our justice as we see it? Is by recognizing that retributive justice is not the solution. It can't be an eye for an eye. It can't be that someone harmed me and so we sent him to jail so the slate is clean, right? It's not, because that person who suffered harm has suffered harm. We have done nothing to acknowledge that harm. We have done nothing to remedy that harm. And that harm is getting repeated and perpetuated as we go along because we haven't done anything to address the root cause of that harm. And that to me is where we need to work. We need to take a step back and say, what do we as a country owe to people to whom harm has been caused? And it's being caused and it's being done every day, and we don't consider it, we push it under the carpet. When I say we, I mean a majority of us, right? I mean, and there are many, many, many great people who are working on these issues, but it has to become a mainstream topic. It has to be talked about. And we need people who are not just lawyers, because you have skills that a lot of lawyers don't. We need people who know how to work with victims. We need to understand what the needs of victims are. We need, what is it? Empathy. We need empathy in the system.
This whole element of interdependence, which you are clearly moving towards, and about recognizing the various roles that each one of us, even on this panel, plays, is so important. And just knowing the role of each individual space while we do what we do is essential. I have a recommendation to make, that we take these panels and switch them up for the 8 p.m. addresses, because they would be so much more pertinent to addressing what's happening in our nation at present. Also, shout out to Tasleem, who is doing such a phenomenal job of making this conversation accessible to so many more people. Tasleem, thank you so much. Mitali, coming to you, there's going to be a volley of a couple of different things. One is, how do we speak truth to power, especially in situations where we are dependent emotionally, financially, etc., on the people that we're challenging? Two, and I'd like you to address this as well, this whole romanticizing of hamara desh naujawano se bhara hai, and we should all look towards the youth because they will lead us out of the mess that we very conveniently created. Three, Mitali, is this idea of punching up. And when we write things, we post things on social media, or we ally with each other in protests, why it's important to punch up and not punch down, while we're calling things out, and not to sort of lash out at people who do not have access or come from marginalized spaces, but actually to people who do have access to resources and power. So there's three in a short for Mitali, and for those of you who are dropping questions in the chat box or in the question and answer window, we are picking up your questions, so please continue to do so. We will be taking just a couple more. So over to you, Mitali, for all three.
Thank you so much, Riddhi. And once again, I really have to acknowledge you've done a great job moderating this and giving everybody, an equal space, and even directing questions that are relevant to everyone's individual practice and work. I'd also like to just recommend that whatever questions are being dropped in, if one can address who they're for, it'll really, really help. I think even Riddhi to take them up. Coming to the questions, speaking truth to power, especially with regards to people we're dependent on in a lot of ways. Firstly, I completely relate to that. I think it's not hidden where I stand politically, or the fact that I am not very fond of the current government in place. I'm saying this as a disclosure because my whole family, in fact, has been associated with the ruling party. They work with the ruling party, have been associated with their larger organization too since decades. There is not another party they voted for since they started voting. Um, and honestly, I'm pretty sure that's the case for a lot of people, that we do not agree with a lot of our families and friends and what they believe in. And when it comes to people who we are attached to, or people who are family or who are friends, it becomes very tricky to navigate that space. Till what extent can you keep extending compassion? Till what extent can you keep working with them, towards them? And how do you speak truth to power? I feel, one, if you are somebody who it's not safe for to acknowledge your truth in front of them, please protect your life before anything else. This is not something that is usually said out loud, given that we keep reinforcing how it's important to speak truth to power. But please save your life. I know so many of my friends who are under harm within their own family structures. They're people, a lot of my friends whose identities are hidden with their family, because if they reveal to them that, I am, say, a trans person, their families could cause harm to them. And it's okay if you have to hide certain truths in order to be your most authentic self otherwise, or in order to escape a situation of harm. um, Honestly, for me, there are a lot of things I hide from my family too, and I find it completely acceptable to do that, because it helps me live a more thriving life outside. And that's okay. I think it's okay to want to protect ourselves first, and we can hope and we can keep challenging them in ways that feel safe to us. I personally know that I've carved out a space finally in my family structure to keep very openly calling them out while we sit at the dining table, because I'm honestly out of that house. I'm not dependent on them in a lot of ways. Yes, I do talk to them, I do care for them, but I also cannot push aside the fact that a lot of things they believe in are things that harm me. Um, and these are conversations I've had with them openly. I remember when the CA and RC protests were happening, my grandfather called me up and said, please do not be attending them. And I told him, you cannot be stopping me, and you cannot even stop me from being involved with organizing them, for the matter that what's happening is wrong, and what you believe in is going to ultimately harm me and identities like mine. And you have to acknowledge that on a larger level, what you believe in is not just going to impact these faceless people or these faceless groups or these faceless identities. It also comes back to your own home. And today, as I speak to you all, my entire family is down with COVID in UP. I don't think I have to spell out loud what the situation is in UP. Today, they're not turning to the government for help. Today, they're turning to me and asking me for resources to help them arrange for things in the state. They've come down to a point where now, when danger knocks on their door, they have seen the truth. And it's sad that it had to come to this. It had to come to my family being under harm. And it's okay for you to, I have to say this out loud, it's okay for you to cut off friends and family if you feel that you are actively under harm if you are around them. Our blood relations in no ways are above our own dignity. And it's okay. We can find a middle ground, we can set up boundaries, we can create spaces, and we must. And as in when you find the space to speak truth to power in these personal spheres, do it in your own ways. Whether it even means subtly hinting at something, sending articles on your WhatsApp group, talking about radical kindness, or helping them out in ways, you figure out a path that works best for you and go ahead with it. Learn to protect yourselves, learn to speak truth to power where it's safe for you to do that. Because if you are a marginalized identity, the burden should not be on you, which should, like, I'm using this as my lead into the punching up question, why it's important to not constantly pressurize marginalized identities to either be speaking up or to take the onus of upturning systems upon themselves. So, for example, we see a lot of these panels that are taking place. How can we deal with casteism? And it's a panel of people who come from DBA identities, Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi identities. Or for that matter, how do we deal with casteism? And it's an entirely upper caste panel. But nobody says how you as an upper caste person or how you as the oppressor should be doing the work in order to upturn that system. The onus should always be on the oppressor groups in order to upturn systems, because they are the perpetrators of this crime. They are the people um, who have been harming the people, and the amount of grief that everybody from marginalized identities is to deal with, to even gather the courage to speak up and to constantly talk about their grief and their trauma is not okay. Therefore, it's important to keep holding people in power accountable. It's important that we always look towards who holds the power and ask them what they're doing with it. Um, like during the Hathras protests, for example, I remember a lot of people who were from the Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi communities. I remember they were speaking actively about it, but after one point, they reached compassion fatigue. And it's important to acknowledge that. And they came up and they ended up saying that, we're not going to be talking about this anymore because this shouldn't be on us. Y'all as oppressors need to be talking about this. Y'all need to be out there and doing something about it, because we've done enough for our communities. And I agree, they have. Their entire existence has been based on systemic grief. It has been based on systemic trauma. Therefore, it's important to punch up. And we see people who are young taking to the stage and talking about this and taking the onus of educating people they shouldn't be. Which is where I'll talk about the romanticizing of youth hai lad lega. Kyun kare youth aisa? Why should the onus be on the youth to do this? We have an entire life ahead of us. And the amount of trauma that we have to carry throughout this entire life is unfair. I remember reading this quote about there was this post that was going around, and it said that people who were involved with the French wars, etc., the youth was very hopeful about their future. And the psychologist, when she talks to the youth now, they don't have larger ambitions, they don't have hope for their future, they don't think about larger ideas of their life. And it's because we're challenged on an everyday basis. We, the young, in whatever 2-3 decades of our life, have already seen 2 to 3 global disasters. This is a second wave of a pandemic going on. And it's not fair. It's not fair upon any young person to be doing this. And we keep saying, I remember a lot of people had started saying that youth se daro because the youth have nothing to lose. But they forget that we are the ones who have everything to lose. We have an entire life ahead of us. And the amount of trauma and grief that we have to carry throughout that entire life is not fair. You see people who went through the Holocaust, some of whom are still alive now, and they talk about how they still have to deal with trauma. Or for that matter, my grandfather went through the partition as a child. They don't bring these things up anymore because they're still living and dealing with that trauma. The onus of this should be on perpetuating groups. So I'm just going to round this up very quickly. When Greta Thunberg says, how dare you? How dare you? Because it's a generation above us who are actually sitting here and they're ruining lives for us and the future that we have ahead of us. And I think that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Mitali. And thank you for being with us today despite circumstances. Um, all three questions answered there. Shifting focus for a minute back to Naghma, and wanting you to throw some light on why we shouldn't pedestal the idea of being calm and peaceful and being incredibly humble and rooted at all times when we're doing what we're doing, and just owning what we're doing and being openly unabashed about how what we're doing is important. It is crucial, standing up for all of the different initiatives and causes that we've all taken up. Um, Second question that I'd like for you to quickly throw some light on is what Devyani also touched upon quite well about this interdependence being woven into our work. Why collectivization of efforts, why collaboratives are essential, because when we have a Sonal and a Devyani and a Mitali and a Naghma together and at this lean ensuring that it reaches others, we see the amplification of our efforts. So 2 points that we'd like to hear from you on.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Mitali, for everything. I think it was incredible hearing you. Riddhi, you also know this. I've also written about this. I think our overemphasis and how we are trained right from the time we're very, very young on being nice, being polite, loving something, appreciating, humble. So there is this whole set of, good behaviors, and then there are a set of bad behaviors. And we've made good behavior so way up there that not achieving the epitome of that particular definition makes us a bad person. And that black and white is something that is very much a part of how we are how we are trained really from the time we are very, very young. I find as more and more I work, I think that is ridiculous, almost like ridiculous, because anger, hate, disgust has immense power. The anger that you see in Mitali right now, the anger that drove Sonal to work, the anger that Devyani must be feeling negotiating the the power structures and the frameworks. It's the anger that brought people, that propelled people into action. So we cannot undermine and we cannot undervalue these so-called negative behaviors that have immense power to move us into action. I say be angry because anger works, be disgusted because disgust must propel action, be irritated because it's irritation that should bring out thought. I mean, be all those things, but just don't be apologetic about it, because why should we? We are human beings. We are made of many behaviors. It is what we do with what we feel that's more important. Whether it is love, whether it is hatred, whether it is anger, whether it is peace, it's what we do after that matters. If we are at peace with ourselves but are very fine with only ourselves, I don't see that as a virtue. If we are angry and we only are upset with ourselves, closed in our own universes, I don't see that as a virtue too. So it's more about what you do with the feeling that you have, and there is no good and bad at all. Bringing that to the whole thing of kindness and in the way of how we look at collectivization in the sector. Coming from a slight distance, I tell you, I found the lack of kindness amongst the various players in the development sector very sad, because I think even as organizations that are working for similar causes in different areas, we are not kind to each other. Unfortunately, power, seeking of funding, our geographies, our communities and the structures that make us work or succeed in a particular place have made us suspicious and non-collaborative with those who could have actually lifted us up, and we could have lifted them back. This is one of those sectors which does not need any competition. There is such a big universe of work that needs to be done that we can just go lifting each other and collectively combating stuff. But instead, we fall into the trap of the same structures that are built to divide, structures of funding, structures of, the structures that basically make us feel that we can say we have been successful. My program, my community, my deliverable, my KPI, my methodology becomes very, very important, and my methodology is the best and everybody else is second best. It's winning no one. There can be no one superior methodology. There can be no one good behavior. There can be no one anything, because that's not how human beings are built. And if in the development sector we do not figure that out and collectivize, it's what's happening now is going to happen, which is we're going to be faced with disasters. We're going to put knee-jerk, band-aid solutions together, collaborative in disaster, isolated in peace. What's the point? There is no this kind of action. So I'm just to keep it short, I think there's immense power in anger. So be angry. Channelize in the right place, because anger is going to take us much farther away than love. Because not because love doesn't work, but because love gives us a fake sense of comfort. Whether it's our family or whether it's people we care about, we compromise with love. But you use anger well, there's miles to go. And use anger to fix beyond your own ecosystems. That's where we can move from one ecosystem to the other, because I think anger is the most supreme emotion, maybe very closely competing with hate. You must hate the right things and use it with that anger, and then there's no limit to what one can do. But collectivizing in the sector, while we can bleed our hearts out for the communities, till we don't figure out ways in which we can leverage each other, co-negotiate. I mean, if a Mitali is going out there and standing there and speaking in rallies, why is she vulnerable? Because there's not enough around her. We've put it into groups, right? Protester, non-protester, funder, NGO, service delivery model and rights-based model. I mean, what are these structures about? These are cool for definitions, but in work they just weaken us, and we're going to have to figure out. I think the power of this generation, I think, is to be able to break these boundaries and say it's what we want to do that matters, and not the baggage of the definitions that are very coolly used to split us. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Naghma. We have just 3 minutes left, and I'm going to invite Sonal to make a closing remark basis what we've. So we have a to-do list. Be angry is on the top of it. Be unapologetic comes second. Tune in for these kind of discussions and dialogues that OFC is hosting is number 3, because they're always looking at very pertinent topics, and they're looking at things that are very path-breaking, should not be path-breaking. So there's so many different takeaways, and I'm going to ask Sonal to say something before we sort of conclude for the day. And Devyani, I'm coming to you after Sonal.
I'll just quickly take 30 seconds maybe. First up, thank you for putting this together, the entire OFC team, Riddhi, Vandita. I know, Riddhi, you're not OFC, but I think today you represent OFC for me today.
I am so OFC, oh my God, and all of you are OFC.
Because, when I hear Mitali speak, it just, I don't know if I can be called a boomer as yet, but I think I am angry at all the boomer starting people in my family too. But I think when I hear Mitali speak, there's this sense of, I don't know what, positivity would be defined as, but it just it just gives me hope. Is too little a word for what Mitali represented today, I think. But if there's one concluding thought in my head, there's a lot of grief that I have personally felt in the last 2 weeks. We have always been with the survivors. We have always seen madness with respect to abuse and violence and crazy amount of stuff with children and with girls all the time. But I think there is this last 2 weeks of inexplainable grief that's kind of, it's taking over. And we don't have the time or the luxury to say, for 3 weeks, I'm going to be grief stricken. And I'm not saying that should be the way for everyone or whatever, but we find ourselves as, either caregivers or doctors or teachers or social workers or, people who are just working in this space. We just find ourselves in spaces that we don't have the luxury of time to say, hey, I'm going to caress my grief today. And again, this is not right or wrong. This is what it is. But let me also remind people what has worked for me. That grief loves, it thrives in spaces, it thrives in silence. When you give voice to a story, when you give voice to a survivor story, to somebody who's been wronged, who's been violated, but when you give voice to a pain, we are making sure that grief has nowhere to hide. because the minute you are not talking about grief, the minute you're not talking about rage, the minute you're not talking about, and just you're compiling it within yourself for whatever reasons, again, nothing good or bad, but if you're just putting it inside your heart, it'll thrive in silence. Let it out, share, ask for help. Maximum, this is like one of the goals that I always tell myself for fundraising, for example, right? Zyada se zyada koi mana karega na, what will they do? So just ask. And I was somebody who said, oh, I can't fundraise, I'm like this person when I started. But now you have to be besharam, right? You have to like zyada se zyada, they'll say no. Okay. Similarly with your grief, and grief and gratitude can exist together. It's okay. It's okay to feel grace. It's okay to feel, yes, I'm in a space where I'm like I think Naghma and Mitali mentioned, it's okay to be in a space and not be apologetic that, I am getting my 2 square meals a day. But be in awareness of your grief and voice it out, because when you're voicing it out, you're not giving grief a place to hide, or rage a place to hide. You're letting it out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think this has been such a healing experience for so many people who are listening in. We have some incredible comments in the chat box. Devyani, we're going to close with you, and you have about 30 seconds to say whatever you want to. Before you start, I just want to say that all the links to everyone's social media handles as well as their work are in the chat box. There are some incredible quotes made by all of our panelists today, which you will see in your chat box as well. And we request for the tech host to not shut down the platform for at least a few minutes after we're done, so that people can scroll up and access the chat box. Thank you, Devyani. Over to you to close.
So thank you so much, Sonal, Riddhi, Mitali, Naghma, Tasleen, OFC, and all the listeners. It's been incredible. I have had a challenging week, a challenging day. Everybody around is coming out COVID positive, or helping organize things constantly. This was an uplifting talk. I'm not going to apologize for my kids, something I stopped doing last year. But the only thing I'd like to say is be kind to yourself and be kind to each other, because it's very important that we don't try and outwork each other, right? We are all on the right side of this fight, and it's important to recognize that and acknowledge that, and work with each other. We have to uplift each other. We are our strength. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Devyani. Thank you. Oh, okay, like that. All right. Thank you, Sonal. Thank you, Mitali. Thank you, Devyani, Tasleen, Naghma. Thank you. Tanaya, Vandita, Nisha, Jaren, everyone at OFC for believing that these are topics that need to be center staged. Thank you for the power-packed group that you are. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in on a Sunday afternoon, but suddenly feels like Monday morning after this discussion, because we're all raring to go. Thank you for being with us today. I'm going to sign out now.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.